In this video, we're going to use a Django model to create a database table. Now, in these videos for the Django series, I'm going to start by showing you some completed code in case you want to come back and review it really quickly later, and then I'm going to code everything from scratch. All right, so in this example, what I'm going to plan to do is have a website that has a list of veterinarians and the animals, also known as patients, that a veterinarian treats. All right, so in part one, I'm going to create a table or a model for the veterinarian. In part two, I'll create the table for the animals that the veterinarian treats. When we're all done, this is going to be the code that we end up with. So in part one, we're going to create a models.py file that has this code in it that represents on the back end a veterinarian table. And this is how we register this model or table with the overall application. And then later on, we're going to implement this additional model, which is an animal patient. And notice there's something a little special about it, and that is that there's a many-to-many relationship between a veterinarian and an animal. So there's just one record or one table here initially, and then there's two tables with the understanding that a veterinarian can have many animals. That's a setup that we are likely to see in the real world where one table might have another table that's related to it, and for each record there could be many entries in the other table. And when we do the second part, there's going to be a requirement to register both of the models with the overall website application. And as we go through this, here are some of the key commands that we will be using. And so let's get started. I'll post this later on in the notes that go along with the video. Okay, in order to do this, the first thing you need to do is set up a Django project and put an app in there. And if you haven't done that before, then go and watch the previous video that I'll put in the description for this video right at the top. And once you've done that, then you'll be ready to go with this video. Okay, and just some notes in terms of how I got things set up right here. I typed in this command because I like to use Docker when I run my Django applications. And the next thing I did, and this was again going to be in the video that you see in the link, and then I created a project with a particular name, and I wanted it to be a veterinarian project. So that creates the overall project folder and then the administration folder for the website. The next thing I did is I changed directory so that I'm within this, so that my working directory from the perspective of the terminal is within this folder. So that means I can directly run using the Python command, python space manage.py, and run this particular file for various reasons. So once I changed into that folder, I ran the command python manage.py start app main, and so I created the main application. Usually I would set up additional things like a folder for templates so I could render HTML pages and stuff like that. But for this particular application or demonstration where I'm only showing how to use models so that I could administer them in the admin portion of the website, I don't need to do any of that extra stuff to set up the web pages right now. Although that is done in my previous video, and that's perfectly fine to do that. Okay, one of the first things that I want to do is I want to set up a database in the back end. And the preferred way to do this, let me show you where databases are set up within an application. So in the admin portion of the website, you have a settings.py file, and you come down and there's a place that says databases. And when I'm doing something for production, I would typically put in enterprise class database like Postgres. But when I'm just learning or teaching, it's perfectly fine to use the SQLite database, and it'll put a little file over here when it creates something. So let's go ahead and allow this database to be created and used. So I'm going to type in the following command, python manage.py migrate. There we go. And it created that little database in the back end. Okay, now let's create a user that is going to be stored in that database. So I'm going to do python manage.py create super user, and I'll let the user be called root. I'll put some defaults there. I'll just leave it blank. And for my password, I'll make it password1, and I'm going to override the validation there. So just to make it super simple. Okay, so now that has been done. Let's go ahead and start my application and see what happens. So I'm going to type Python manage.py run server, and because I sometimes run this through an AWS Cloud 9 environment, I actually put some extra numbers there on the end, which work both on my local computer as well as up on Cloud 9 when I'm using AWS. Okay, so with my server up and running, let's see what happens. I type in localhost port 8080, it's working, and then I do /admin, and here is where I can type in that super user username and password. And if I have created a database like I just did, and you can see that it showed up over there after the migrate command, then I'm going to be able to log in and have myself as a user here. Okay, now in terms of using models, what I want to do is, instead of just having a users table, which is represented by what's right here, I want to have other tables that represent things related to the application that I'm going to build. So in this case, I want to have some veterinarians, and I want to have an entry here so that I can create and modify veterinarians. So this is how I would do that. So I'm going to go over to here, and in the application that I created earlier, I'm going to click on models.py, and it already says create your models here. And I'm going to type in some information. Class veterinarian models.model. And I need to enter in some fields. So I'm writing this as if it's Python code, but I know that this is going to get turned into a table when I run the migrate command eventually. All right, perfect. So what I'm planning so far is for there to be a first name column in my veterinarian table. I want there to be a last name column in my veterinarian table. And let's give them something else. I'll say license number, so we can demonstrate using something other than characters, equals models.integer field. And we'll say default equals 0, if I can type. And then we like to have something that displays whenever we're looking at a record in the administrative area. And so we use this little function right here. So there's underscores around the str, which means essentially toString for any particular record. And I'll do return self.firstName plus self.lastName. Now let me just stop for a second and explain what we're doing here. In a lot of languages, in a lot of frameworks, you would go into a database directly and you would create a table for the thing that you want to keep track of. For example, I might, in other languages and other frameworks, go into the database and physically using the SQL manipulation language, I would create tables and databases related to the veterinarian, and I would see all that directly. But when I'm using Django, it wants to help me avoid having to know any SQL directly. So I won't have to know in the long-term SQL commands. All I need to do is know some Python code that represents a table, and then the Django framework will take care of adding and dropping columns, and then through my programs, the Django and Python code will allow me to add entries to my tables without having to know SQL directly. Now, for me, that's a little weird. I've been programming for over 20 years. I feel perfectly fine with SQL, but a lot of purists in computer science and stuff recognize that there's a paradigm shift when you're working on a website and you're dealing with objects one moment, and then you're working, and then you have to translate those objects into this other language in order to go back and forth with the database. And so to avoid having to know this other paradigm and other language, which is SQL, you can just work with something that you know, which is a programming language. So I don't know if I necessarily buy that reasoning, but it's fine. We'll go with it. At least we know what they're trying to do, trying to help us avoid having to know SQL and work with that and work with databases directly. Okay, so this is a class that eventually is going to help us, or help Django create some SQL statements that will create a veterinarian table. There's one last thing we need to do. We go over to apps and not apps, sorry. We go over to admin, and it says register your models here. So let's go over here first and say from the models file, import one of the classes, which is that one. And now we're going to register. Now what we do when we register is this is making it so that when I go back to this page, I'm actually registering with the administration page. So the table is going to exist even without putting it here. But if I want to administer it on that page, then I have to add this entry right here on this page. Admin.site.register veterinarian. And now I'm good to go. All right, so I'm going to have to hit Control C down here and stop my web server. And now I'm going to, one little second here. I have my notes in one of my screens here. I know all the commands. I just want to make sure I don't mess up anything. Man, it's taking me a minute. All right, so just be patient. I've got it in one of my windows. I just can't see it anywhere. Okay, anyway, here we go. So I'm going to type Python manage.py make migrations main. And so what this does is it says look in this folder and figure out what SQL statements are going to need to run to update the database to reflect this change right here. So I go ahead and it generates the SQL statements and puts it in a file over here in a folder. And then we say Python manage.py make migrations main. Oops, sorry, I already did that one. Manage.py migrate. So now that actually runs that file. All right, so now I know that it's actually been created on the background in the admin site. So let's go see what's there. I go and I reload the page. Uh-oh, it says not working. Why is that? Because I need to start up my web server again. So let's try that. There we go. Running the web server, reloading the page. There we go. And now there is an entry for this table that was created based on the model code. And I can click on add right here, and I can start adding veterinarians like Mickey Mouse, and their license number is 1234. Save and add another. Minnie Mouse 3456 or 5, whatever you want to call it. Hit save. We're good to go. And if I wanted to, I could click on one of these and I could change something like put it with the number that I actually wanted. So one of the reasons why people like Django is because with a relatively small amount of code, I am then able to create a database table and maintain it through this interface. Now let's do something that's a little bit more difficult at this particular point, which is instead of just having a straight set of records in a table, let's make two tables that have a relation one to another. So let's go ahead and demonstrate what we're talking about here. So I'm going to come up here to the top of this one, and I'm going to add a new model, and it's going to be called animal patient. And just to save myself some typing, I'm going to just copy and paste from my other window because I don't want to have to make you watch me type the whole time. This one, it's going to have a name of the table, which is animal patient. So think about an animal that might exist at a vet's office. It's an animal, and it is the patient, if you look at it that way. And we'll give it a name like Rover or Buffy or something like that. Maybe it'll be an owner name. person who owns that pet, a description, maybe it's a dog, maybe it'll be golden retriever, black Labrador. And one way we might distinguish these animals is how old they are. Okay, good enough. Now there's one other change that I want to make. A veterinarian at this point might have certain patients. So there might be multiple veterinarians at a particular clinic, and each of them might have different patients that are assigned to them. So this is how we can create a relationship between two tables. If I ran it like it is right now, what would happen is after running the migrate command and make migrations, it would just add another table and it would have data like that. But if I want them to be related to one another, where there's an entry in the veterinarians table that represents one of the animals, then I have to do the following. So I come over here to veterinarian and I add another field, and it's going to say animal patient. So it could be any variable I want. And I'm going to say models dot, and then there's lots of different types of relationships that you can have, like many to one, like one to one, or many to many. And this is going to be well, I'll make this a many to many field in this case. So we'll pretend like the patient can be, belong or be used by multiple veterinarians. But there's all kinds of different rules, we call it cardinality, for relating two different things. And we have options for that in Django. So I'll just do many to many to make this simple. Animal patient. There we go. And I'll allow you to not assign, if you want to, you don't have to assign an animal to a vet. Okay, so there I go. I've prepared to create a new table with this model, and I've prepared to add animals to a veterinarian. So we hit save there, and let's go over to the admin.py file. And in order for me to be able to manipulate the records in this administrative website, I'm going to need to register that with that administration website. So admin.site.register, and what's it going to be called? It's going to be an animal patient. Animal patient. Save. All right. Let me go ahead and hit Control-C, stop my server. I'm going to click up a few times, and here's my Python manage.py. Well, that's hard. That's kind of hard to read. Let's just see if this is manage.py make migrations main. Oops. What have I done? Python manage.py. Oh, I don't know where that Y came from. Python manage.py make migrations main. It created a file that's ready to be run, and I'll do Python manage.py migrate, and the SQL command has now been run. Let's come over to here and see what happens. Oh, let's start up our web server again so we don't get that error message. There we go. It's running. Come back here, reload. There we go. Let's go ahead and if I click on this, I know I have 0 animal patients, and I know I need to add some. So let's do, I'll use my animals. So I have a dog named Butterscotch, and his owner name is Dagan Kettles, and the pet description is Chihuahua. Hopefully I spelled that right. He's about 13 years old. I'll say save and add another. There's something that broke there. Animal patient object has no attribute name. All right, guess I'm going to have to pause this video. All right, well, as embarrassing as that is, I can see what mistake I made. It says there's no name. If I come over here to my model, here's what I did. I have a pet name, and I try to list out a name, and that's not a variable, but I have I do have a self.pet name. So let's just see if that works. So I come back here. Let's go ahead and reload. Continue. Okay, good enough. Actually, let's just go look here. Okay, so it got saved. We're good. Let's add another one, and we'll say licorice, and that's another one again. Me, and this one is also a Chihuahua, and she's also, I don't know, 14 or 13 years old, and I'll hit save. Okay, so let's go over here to veterinarians. And let's go ahead and take my veterinarian Minnie Mouse, and I click on them. And now I have the opportunity to assign any of the animals to that vet. So I go ahead and click on there, and I click save. And so if I were to come back to Minnie Mouse again, it's highlighted so I can see that Butterscotch is a patient that belongs to Minnie Mouse. Let's go over here to Mickey Mouse and say, I can't remember which one I just did. Licorice will be assigned to Mickey. Hopefully I got a unique to each one, but it doesn't really matter. Or because this is a many-to-many relationship, I can actually click two different things and say both of those patients are related to Mickey or to that particular veterinarian, whichever one that was, since I can't seem to keep it straight. But regardless, you get the idea that, for example, I can assign to Minnie Mouse many patients, and they're all highlighted. So a lot of magic just happened there related to interacting with databases and populating database tables. And Django does a lot of work for us, and we really just need to specify the fields that are here. If you go out on the internet and you just look up a table reference for Django Models and look up what kind of fields you can set, you'll see a whole listing of things that you're able to set for different types of table columns. Some of the other things you might need to store might be a date as an example, or maybe a decimal. And you can look up all those things on the internet, but this should get you started. All right, hope this is helpful. Have a great one. Bye-bye.